Good morning, everyone. I just love seeing the little uptick of participants keep joining. So we will give just a little bit, maybe another minute, because we are wanting to honor folks' time. And if you're at the Northdown ACH 2020 Winter Partner Convening, you're in the right spot. We'll get ready, we'll get started here just in like another minute and let some folks continue to join. Okay. Stacy, Elizabeth, we ready to go? Okay, great. There are a few more folks joining, but I'll just start with welcoming everybody back. For those who were with us on Wednesday, we started our convening, even though it's virtual, by acknowledging the Indigenous people's land in which we are by reading our land acknowledgement. So I'm gonna do the same thing today. And there, Stacy or Elizabeth's gonna put in a link to this, the nativeland.ca, where each of you can also learn about the land in which you are currently on. So I'll start with our land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. On Wednesday, we also provided this brochure, The Importance of Land Acknowledgement, of brief examples and resources. And we're going to put that in the chat again. And we are sharing a new resource. And we are crossing our fingers that technology is on our side this morning, but you never know. And this is a work in partnership with Children of the Setting Sun. It features one of our own, Michaela Vendiola, which is she's a member of our team, and her daughter, which we always love seeing. And the video, we're only going to show you a clip of this, but the video, once it's all finished, it goes into detail explaining the importance of land acknowledgements, and also how the history of how tribal nations have always welcomed and acknowledged land territories when they're hosting visitors or traveling to other tribal nations. When it's done, it'll be about 10 minutes, but we wanted to kind of show you a short clip teaser. And okay, here we go.
Instead of leaving tribal nations in a past tense conversation. This has historically been the case and perpetuates a tribal erasure rhetoric and the belief that American Indians and Alaska Natives are relics of the past. But as you can see here, in the year 2019 and 2020, we are still very much practicing our Chelangan or way of life in this area. So implementing a land acknowledgement within a non-tribal organization is an opportunity for that organization to learn about the land where we all live, work, and play, and about the people that have been living here and will live here forever. Just as important, the work to structuralize tribal.
So again, I want to thank to Michaela and the team at Children of the Setting Sun Productions. We're really looking forward to that video being completed. It's both visually beautiful and the messaging is really spectacular. So looking forward to sharing that all with you very soon. And Monty, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us all set up.
That sounds great, Nicole. And good morning, everyone, and welcome. And yeah, shout out to Michaela and the Children of the Setting Sun Productions. It is a beautiful video, and all the material that you all have assembled around to make sure that the land acknowledgement is a really important part of the culture of the North Sound. And, you know, for those of us that work in other parts of the country too, to really share your leadership in that, and really to set that as a standard for how we think about meaningful land acknowledgement. So thank you so much for sharing that, not just with this region. So yesterday yesterday was Wednesday, you know, we had a really amazing and rich conversations thanks to many of the peer leaders here that helped to lead and kind of prepare the agenda for us. And, you know, I also really just appreciate how we engage with one another. And so I won't go through all of these working agreements. This is a reminder around how we honor our time and are present with each other. I really enjoyed how active you all were with each other in some of the cross conversations with the chat. And, you know, this idea of being in dialogue, which I think was also really modeled beautifully, particularly with that first group of panelists, around how we really listen for each other's truths, how we're willing and vulnerable to share our own truths, and, you know, really, you know, listening for what we hold in common, which to me is kind of the whole spirit of dialogue that I fully expect and hope will continue throughout our time together. And, you know, we're going to build off of where we landed on Wednesday. So maybe we could pull up just the kind of day two. As you recall, we were kind of talking about what really drives well-being and how do we understand well-being, and particularly through this notion of thriving. How do we measure it? How do we catalyze? How do we improve that? So we started that conversation, and we also gave folks an opportunity to take a self-report survey to kind of explore what that would look like. And, you know, here in just a little bit, we're going to hear about from two different leaders around how they have been using both well-being and using measurement to really drive boosting equitable being in their respective communities. And after we have a chance to do that in a break, we're going to hear a little bit from Nicole and Liz to kind of set some context for kind of most recently where we've been and where there's some evolving directions and, you know, context that will be really important for thinking about how we enter into 2021 together, and an opportunity for you all to kind of reflect and add to kind of the setup from Liz and Nicole. And just as a reminder, we had a number of our partners that created this agenda together and wanted to make sure that there was plenty of time for our folks and to really exchange with and get to meet the partners, as, you know, building relationships is a really important part of these kind of larger cross-partner convening. So just going to encourage you all to do that again through the chats and through the breakouts as much as you possibly can. So again, we maybe just jump, I forgot to mention, and sorry for this, maybe just hold for one quick second. I meant to encourage everybody to just chat their name and chat their pronouns and what, you know, community or organization you're with, just so we can make sure. Elizabeth had put that in there, so thank you for that. But it's really great to start getting people's chat voice in early. And again, just so grateful for folks carving out time to be here with, you know, everybody today. I think it holds a lot of promise when we spend time together. So yeah, so thanks Elizabeth for holding off there for a minute. So we took this survey, and as you know, a reminder, there's a couple different ways that we are thinking about well-being. One is through the lens of, you know, our own, how we think, feel, or function. I say we as an individual, and also those kind of vital conditions, those surroundings that all people, no matter where they are in the globe, no matter where they are in their life course, depend on to thrive. And so we talked a little bit about that yesterday or on Wednesday, and we gave the survey. And I wanted to just offer up just some quick reflections and kind of share back some of the patterns with those of you who took the survey. And again, just to emphasize, this was more to get a flavor of it, not so much to do any deep analysis of it. So I think we have a couple of slides here. And those of you who took it, thank you. And by the way, as I'm sharing some of these slides, I'm gonna just have you all be thinking about whether you took the survey or not. A lot of you did, or whatever I share with you, kind of what things might be popping up for you, what stories or questions, you know, are popping up for you, or your experience taking it. So just would be really curious. So you were given an opportunity to kind of name the community that you're from, your physical location, but also the community one of the communities that you're part of. And you can kind of see the broad distribution, and not surprising, there were more folks from Whatcom in this particular group. And just as almost of a reminder, if we were going to be doing, you know, self-report surveys like this, there would be a really very intentional way. It could be of how we might sample and engage different voices and perspectives in this, but we can break this down in a number of ways. And so as we look at the aggregate, and just as a quick reminder, I don't think I mentioned that Cantrell ladder piece, and, you know, have my colleague in Convening, Shoma, who's going to talk a little bit more about this, but this Cantrell ladder, that is one of the most powerful social science indicators for really predicting our well-being and how we think, feel, and function, and what we will do, and has a lot of implications that Sheila's probably going to go in a little bit more depth, I hope, than I am. But this is the aggregate. So that question of where do you put yourself on this ladder, best possible life, that 10 scale ladder, that if you score a 7 or above on that, or gave yourself where you are today, and then there was another question, as you may recall, where you kind of imagine your life being 5 years from now. So if you gave a 7 above now and an 8 and above 5 years from now, as you're kind of anticipating that, then you would be put into this thriving category. And again, this is something Gallup's been doing millions of times over for some time now, and it's a highly validated measure. And on the other side of that, you know, there's thriving, suffering, struggling. And if you are suffering, you would have a 4 or below, both in that first question around where you are now, as well as that second question, anticipating you where. So this basically, those of you who participate in this, we see that 52% of us are struggling and 48% are thriving. And kind of based even on our conversations, that may not be surprising, but it's significant that we all are showing up there. We are struggling. There's nobody right now that fits those criteria around suffering. It's not to say that we don't suffer, but just in an instrument like this. And you can imagine, as we expanded this, no doubt, there are lots of people in our region that are suffering, and this type of instrument would be one kind of way to start to pick some of that up. So next slide. We did a word cloud here, which is, there was a couple of open-ended surveys, and one was kind of more of a collective. What's holding us back? What's hindering our community from experiencing well-being? And these word clouds, as some of you know, just pick up the most prominent words in those open-ended surveys and kind of give us some sense of what folks were saying. And so our team was just kind of looking through these word clouds and actually the actual full sentences of what folks were talking about. And so again, this idea of racism and racist policies and systemic racism, you know, showed up a lot in our policies. And I think a close cousin to that was this idea of whiteness, of forms of white supremacy that, again, speaking of some of the hard truths that came out of the panel on day one. There was a number of items around lack of access to basic needs right now that is really holding us back from our well-being. And really how, you know, as we recall, that is a really important vital condition. So there was a fair amount of energy around that. And in particular, really this concern around housing as a vital condition, and humane housing and affordable housing. So those were all pieces. And again, you all can kind of read into however you're starting to see this isn't hitting you around words that are kind of coming out of the word cloud, but those are some of the broader sentences that we saw. So that was what's hindering us. You were also asked, you know, to share your ideas and your experiences around what is currently, you know, boosting us and causing and supporting the well-being. And so along those lines, again, you can see the most prominent words, but kind of pulling out some of the sentences that we're looking is just this culture of caring. Of course, we kicked off on Wednesday with what does it look like to care for ourselves, to care for others, this kind of mutuality, to have a culture of caring and compassion. And that was really pronounced in a lot of the open-ended comments. Somebody talked about relationship. I don't know if that was Liz, but Liz kicked off the day just how important this network's relationships are. And that was definitely a theme among many of you. And so just the flip side of the coin around lack of access, but the fact that we would have access to nature, again, one of the vital conditions, healthy natural environment and the places to be active is something that folks said was really supporting their well-being. This idea of a collaborative culture and our ability to take collective action and effort, and that efficacy kind of came through some of those open-ended culture. You can see those words communal and access and care. And again, maybe not surprisingly, but very pronounced there at the bottom is this idea of belonging. And so I know you all have been talking about belonging, and it is again a vital condition for and enormous amounts of research around how we feel a sense of belonging to our well-being, but also this idea of breaking and bridging that you all been playing around with and understanding through some of the work with the Othering and Belonging Institute seemed to be picked up as a thread, and that our ability to create a sense of belonging, not just welcoming or inclusion, but actually people in the process of co-creation, is kind of a little bit of a thread there around belonging. So was there a next slide? I don't think so. So there's a lot of other results, but those are some things out of that, just a handful of minutes that you all started to weigh in on. And I will just stress that this is an instrument, and it's just the self-report side of it. It doesn't paint a complete picture. And I think what we want to do is hear a little bit around how might just even thinking about measuring and being intentional about this might serve us along the lines of actually moving and taking action collectively. So again, if there's some things that are jumping out at you, I will just again, feel free to jump those in. I know I just shared a lot of information with you, but there may be some other things that could pop up for you as we're thinking about how might we apply measurement and dialogue and really understanding who's thriving, suffering, struggling. And we have with us a couple of people that are going to kind of take us to the next level of this work and application of that. And so one of those people, I think many of you know, is Kim Williams, who's the CEO of Providence Northwest. So Kim, I think I saw your name in there, and I want to welcome you. And what we wanted to do is set up a little bit of Kim sharing, and then we have Shomava Shaha, who some of you met when we were together in January, that was talking about these vital conditions and talking about this survey, some of you may recall. And so it seems like a long time ago, but we're going to kind of pick up a little bit where Shoma's left off and how we think about this. And Shoma, I think Elizabeth Romero might actually be with us from Delaware, which is one of the stories. Is that right?
Yes, she is.
Awesome. Welcome into the space, Shoma and Elizabeth Romero, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. I know you have a couple of slides, and Kim, maybe if you don't, and we actually, after we hear from each of you, we'll just kind of open it up for questions and ideas coming from folks as they're kind of hearing what you have to share. But Kim, you all at Providence have already, over the last few years, embraced well-being. You started to really intentionally measure that both within your community, your staff and your partners, but also, as I understand it, in a lot of other community settings. So wondering if you might just open up and share what that looks like. What are you learning? Why did you move into this space with well-being?
Thank you. And thanks for allowing me to share a bit of our story. So in 2015, we worked with community partners. We created a new department called the Providence Institute for Healthier Community. And as an organization, we knew if we wanted to lower the cost of healthcare and decrease the need for hospital care, it is really multifaceted. It doesn't have a lot to do with physical health. So we created this new program, and the leaders there partnered with our communities. They spent months with well over 100 people, really hearing what well-being meant to people, and what did health mean, and how could you possibly get to great health. And they created a survey. It's called the Health and Wellbeing Monitor. It measures 6 really broad areas. And I'm just going to go through those 6 quickly. Relationships and social connections.
Kim, just so you know, you're just fading in and out just slightly. I don't know. And just
hang on.
Great. We understand, by the way.
This is laughing because this happens every time I'm on Zoom. I'm so sorry. So better?
Yes.
Better. Okay. So it's measuring relationships and social connections, security and basic needs, physical health, neighborhood and environment, mental and emotional, and then work, learning, and growth. And we started measuring Snohomish County in 2015. And so for a number of years, we have been able to run the survey, see where we're progressing as a county. They hold a large kind of convening where folks come together and see the results. In 2018, we saw a sharp increase in folks experiencing some form of discrimination in the previous 12 months. Now that was at a county level. And it had jumped up, like I say, 12%. It was 26% of the community. And we reran that survey, of course, in 2019, and the results did not change. Community members were, obviously concerned. We were having conversations about how do we use this data internally. And we have, in the last few years, we have augmented our community health needs assessment, which is something that nonprofit organizations do. And we had always historically just used, or not just, but partnered with our health districts and health departments and used a lot of demographic data. We are now using also the Snohomish County Health and Wellbeing Monitor. And subsequently, all of our CHIP plans now include reducing the stigma associated with. For example, our CHIP includes homelessness, mental health, access to primary care, and there's one other one. Anyway, as we're really working to incorporate that data. It also caused me great pause because as an organization, we have 5,000 caregivers, and we reflect our community. So Snohomish County is 30% BIPOC, 70% Caucasian. Our organization is 69% Caucasian. So we're pretty reflective. And it was hard for me to imagine that we wouldn't see very similar results, and caused me kind of a lot of heartache thinking about, is that discrimination? Is that behavior happening when they're here at work? Or is it when they're out in the community? And if it is happening when they're at work with us, is it colleagues? Is it leaders? Is it patients? Because that is something that healthcare professionals, I trained as a nurse, and it is not uncommon for patients, they come in just kind of where they are, and they are not afraid to share that oftentimes with you, which is not always great. So we had formed a caregiver, it started as a caregiver wellness committee. And as we started talking about the Snohomish County results, the committee said, well, this is broader than health, than being well, than us telling everybody they needed to go out and exercise, right? Because that's kind of what it always is, diet and exercise. And that this was bigger and broader than that. So they changed their name to Wellbeing. We took one of the positions, a really experienced gal who has done externally facing work with our community for 5 years in the Institute for Healthier Communities. and she was doing a lot of well-being and equity work. And we changed the position. So not only was it externally facing, because maybe not surprisingly, and Monty, if I need to stop, tell me if I'm going on too long. And it became an internally as well as externally facing position. And the Wellbeing Committee then decided they wanted to run the health and wellbeing monitor on our caregivers. And, probably no surprise to anybody. We did a start in March because that's when we wanted to do it. And then we had so many COVID patients, we paused. We went back at it in May and finished. And we actually had nearly 1,500 respondents, including medical staff and caregivers. And that question on folks experiencing discrimination was equally as high and maybe a scooch higher. We reran the Snohomish County one subsequent to that, and that number had gone up as well. And there were, I think it was 27%, maybe it was a little less. Anyway, 27%, I believe, of the respondents said they were experiencing discrimination. And some of it was supervisors. And there was a fair bit from colleagues. I've been in healthcare a long time, and we've all worked in environments where people get snarky, and that was definitely impacting the well-being of our caregivers. We've subsequently, we've hired a DEI manager who is focused exclusively internally, helping us put together more comprehensive plans. The other thing that was alarming to me, I shouldn't have been surprised, but just given our current environment, was that 7% of the respondents were concerned that they were going to lose their homes. And that too was one that was like, oh my gosh, we had, it's been a few years ago where we implemented the $15 minimum wage. And I know that that's not very much money, but with that said, it was, what more can we do to support our caregivers? We knew we had a number of them that probably had second jobs, working, catering, those kinds of things. So we've partnered with WorkSource Snohomish County, and they've created 5 really short and incredibly well done videos that we will be, they rolled out last week to our caregivers on just kind of things like budget and how you think about debt and credit. How do you identify your goals for your money, knowing that many of them don't have checking accounts. So that is some of the work that we've done as a result of seeing our results. And we've since merged our well-being and our DEI committee, because if we don't start to go after this equity piece internally, we are not going to accomplish well-being. So those groups have come together. So I am happy at any point if anybody wants to send me an email to share more. And I think you coming back online is the indication that it's time. You're on mute though.
It's just that I had my buttons mixed up. I thought I was on mute and I realized, but I think that's a really perfect start anyway, Kim. Okay. And I know that working a little bit with Providence, you all are really on the leading edge in some ways of thinking about this internally. And I think it picks up the conversations that we've had over the last couple of partner meetings. Like, if we're going to really be serious about equitable well-being and be good stewards, we need to really look in the mirror ourselves. And you all have had some of those tough conversations and are acting on it. So it's really fascinating. And I hope that you'll be able to stay and we'll see what other questions come up, but it might be a nice segue over to Shoma and Elizabeth to really pick up. And I think you have some slides around, more from an external point of view around equitable well-being.
Thank you so much, Monty. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and seeing where you all are, doing your own pulse check, Providence doing a pulse, really looking at how people in their workforce are doing, how people are in the community are doing, and being able to say, where are we doing well in terms of our well-being and where do we have opportunity? I think one of the things that's challenging is that right now we are dying of thirst in an ocean of data. I suspect all of you have hundreds of measures that you owe somebody. I know in our system, we had over 542. And one of the reasons we went about this process of looking at how do we measure well-being and why does it matter and what kinds of measures would actually help us better understand what I think of as the invisible in our plateaus, the big gap between our clinical outcomes and people's overall sense of life and well-being, and how that relates to the underlying conditions of communities and the system of historic inequities that have shaped who has access to those and who doesn't. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to share some stories of that journey, but everything that Kim just shared and that Monty just showed, as a group, you're just like just about everybody else, other group in the nation. Your percent of people thriving and the percent of people struggling is about what it is nationally right now. And I think it's important to realize that, most people wouldn't think I'm struggling or I'm like, they don't put themselves in those kinds of categories. But it's interesting to me that something as powerful as how people feel about their lives, defined not based on domains we say for you, but things that you decide matter for you in terms of what a good life means to you, what a good life is in your community, it turns out is one of the most validated ways of seeing the big picture and of knowing whether we're actually doing well or not and whether we're actually thriving or not. I wanted to share with you that, the WIN measures came out of a process that represents our first national multi-community process to develop shared measures across sectors and across communities for population and community health. This was a process where if communities didn't prioritize a measure, it didn't make it. It's a core measure or a leading indicator. And I think that's really important to understand. And by communities, I don't just mean a wide range of communities that tried out the measures and voted. I also include within that community residents from all walks of life who are parts of those conversations. In addition, just about every measurement initiative weighed in, and we landscaped what hundreds of groups were doing already. Many of them were engaged around the table in developing things. And out of this, we said, instead of going to transportation and saying, transportation, we think this should matter to you in terms of health, we asked transportation, what do you think? What do you know matters to drive well-being? And we asked people who are working on in the environment and people who are working at both at the community level all the way to the federal level with multiple federal agencies involved. And that led to the creation of the set of measures. When we took a step back, one of the measures that emerged, if you go to the next slide, is among the most important was this idea of well-being. In fact, it became so important that it informed the development of Healthy People 2030, which put for the first time health and well-being across the lifespan at the very core of what it did, and acknowledged the social factors and inequities that drive well-being overall, stepping out of just the clinical, physical stuff that Kim was saying we measure all the time, but healthy eating and obese, not that those aren't important things, they are, but getting deeper to say, why is it that that's happening and what else is going on that might represent the invisible in our plateaus. So the WIN measures as a set represent, there are 9 core measures, 54 leading indicators, and many other measures, including, for example, things like the perception of everyday discrimination, or a sense of whether your community cares about you and whether you have a sense of belonging in your community, and how different determinants of health or vital conditions are in place in your community to support each of us to thrive. It helps us see the bigger picture so that we can make decisions collectively together. If you go to the next slide. Now, this Cantor's ladder, the simple 2 questions that you took as part of the well-being assessment yesterday, represents, of course, one of the measures that emerged as a runaway success. It sort of went off the pages, communities ran with it, and they used it in all kinds of ways we had never even imagined, from thinking about it as pulse checks in their coalition meetings, to ways to measure and evaluate outcomes over time, to looking at stratifying risk to quickly identify who isn't thriving, who's struggling or suffering, and what we can do to support in real time, all the way to population level measurement. It turns out that these two simple questions, imagine a ladder where the bottom is your worst possible life and the top is your best, and where are you now, where would you put yourself 5 years from now, is one of the most valid indicators out there. Gallup has done it in over 100 countries. It's been administered millions of times across the world. It's recommended by the OECD and a number of other national indicators. And so, and what's most powerful about it is the ability to take someone's answer to that, however someone defines well-being in their life. For some, it may be that if you don't feel connected to the earth and don't get to be in nature every day, you don't have well-being. You may be financially secure, but if you don't have that connection or that sense of connection to culture, those are things that really matter. And most of our national measures have had very little way of capturing that. And so one of the things that was, if you go back to the prior slide, one of the things that was powerful about this is we could really see from these two simple measures defined in the way that matters to people, not just looking at the trees of each different domain of well-being, but one North Star measure of what % of people are thriving, what % of people are struggling, and what % of people are suffering. One of the most exciting things that happened is then people began to say, how can we increase the % of people thriving and decrease the % of people that are struggling or suffering? It was a measure that made sense, it communicated well to everyone, and you could have community conversations based on that, in addition to, of course, collecting the kind of data that Kim was talking about to more accurately diagnose what domain something might be in. There's good racial and ethnic underlying data for some of these measures, but what's equally important is this year we're beginning a look at all of the WIN measures from a racial justice lens. One of the things we're especially interested in is getting some of your perspectives about what are the kinds of measures should be part of our national measurement system, such as connection to cultural identity and heritage that may not be there now. Next slide. Lots of groups have adopted these measures, from US News and World Report to local communities all across the nation. We keep finding out about some, and you'll get to hear from Elizabeth from her experience in Delaware using these measures in just a moment. If you go to the next slide. There was a study that just came out in the Milbank Quarterly this week, so I thought I'd bring that hot off the presses to you. They looked at about 13,000 people who, over the age of 50, who were in terms of using Cantrell's ladder, and they also followed their physical health outcomes and other life outcomes, their mental health outcomes and other life outcomes. What they found, which has been replicated also by Kaiser, is that those who have the highest well-being versus those with the lowest well-being have better physical health indicators and better mortality, lower number of chronic conditions, and of course, higher self-rated health and health behaviors, such as sleep problems and more frequent physical activity. Turns out if you feel well, you are more likely to be active and sleep better. Not a surprise. It has huge, of course, relationship to mental health outcomes, but also life outcomes like financial mastery, likelihood of being connected with a spouse or partner, lower levels of depression and depressive symptoms, hopelessness, things like, and loneliness. It turns out that it's not particularly associated with specific health conditions like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer, et cetera. We have lots of measures for those guys. This is what these measures do, is help you see the big picture, what helps you see what's invisible in the plateaus of our outcomes. So I just want to give that sense of where it comes in to see, to help us see that. If you go to the next slide. So people have used this in a whole bunch of ways, some we hadn't predicted. A lot of people would actually have coaching conversations if they're in a one-on-one relationship with someone, or even in the community to ask, what are your ideas about what would help improve your well-being? From a risk stratification, it's being used to say, given that the people who are suffering are usually your top 3.5% high risk, high cost folks, the people who are struggling, because it relates to morbidity and mortality, that represents your sort of next 45 medium rising risk group. There's a direct way of using that data to understand in real time who might be at risk and who might need additional supports, as well as identifying equity populations, evaluation, integration into community health needs assessments, and population level surveillance. So these are all different ways in which Cantrill's ladder has been used, as well as other WIN measures have been used. If you go to the next slide. This is one example. This is a community, this is a homeless clinic. Downtown Women's is actually a women's shelter that began working with their women experiencing chronic homelessness who also had chronic health conditions like diabetes. They did a diabetes prevention program and used as an indicator. Of course, they looked at their clinical indicators like A1C and blood pressure, and they saw improvements in all of those. But it turned out that the measure that mattered the most was that they saw a 30% decrease in the percent of people suffering and an increase in the percent of people thriving. They had a control group and they actually controlled for housing placement in this context. So what was really interesting is this was the first time that we became sure that this measure isn't just a moves in a decade kind of measure. It's become clear over the last number of years that both at the large population level and at the small group level, you can see this measure improve in real time in 6 months, and then certainly within 12 months. Go to the next slide. With that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Elizabeth Romero, who joined our team as a We in the World Senior Fellow, but until recently was the head of the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health in Delaware.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go kind of briefly to the slides, but just as a frame, when we were implementing this in Delaware and Shoma presented it to us, it was a real opportunity to think about this as not just a measure, but something that could be done at a system level, a county or organizational level, and it's something that you can actually use as a measure to interact with your community partners, patients in a way that really empowered the case managers that we worked with who utilized it across the state. So as a baseline, again, population base-wise, this is something you can find, I'm sure you've already seen for Washington, Delaware's numbers, which show adults at 55% were thriving, 42% struggling, and 2.49% suffering. Next slide. And what we did is we said, well, let's see what's happening with our youth. And so prior to COVID, we were actually in the middle of putting out into the field for 8th graders and 11th graders, the Cantrill's ladder to understand how the well-being of our adolescents were across the state. Unfortunately, we were only able to get, well, fortunately, we were able to actually get the 8th grade data. And you can see as compared to the adults that for our 8th graders, we actually had a larger number of youth that were suffering. 14% of our 8th graders identified as suffering. And when we tried to break it down by race, we tried to look at it different ways. That's a different presentation, a little bit longer, but it really gave some insight into thinking about our middle school population as they went into high school and what we need to do to prepare them. Next slide. And then as you can see, again, compared to adults, you can see that there are a greater majority of the kids who are, or not majority, the greater number of kids who were identifying as suffering. And so really the difference came in kids that identified as struggling. So the youth kind of went on one end, either they were thriving or they sort of went into the suffering category. One thing we definitely noticed is a connection to some of violence, and looking at violence is something that pertained to this. Next slide. And then we also, as it related to, here we're in the middle of getting ready for a pandemic and overseeing a whole system. You realize that there are a number of people we were case managing. So for people that are accountable health community, you obviously have many people that you're supposed to be connected with. And so what we did is we said, this is it, let's implement the well-being measure to find out how are people doing, not just on their clinical outcomes, but let's monitor their well-being. So we were able to identify those that were hopeful, without hope. We used a simple, well, it's a complicated Excel sheet now, but we used an Excel sheet to help give case managers a sense of how people were doing, what was going on. They were able to identify which of my patient load was suffering, which were thriving, and actually in a way led to some changes that they would not have done had they been monitoring an A1C level or a PHQ-9 level. Next slide. So we monitored their financial security, their sense of loneliness, their sense of social support. And again, it really led the case managers and empowered them, because we said, do something about the numbers. We want you to do more. So they would make extra calls. They took them on grocery store runs in very safe ways. We have lots of pictures of grocery store and other things that they did to connect to their clients in a way that they never would have before. And it really, I think, especially during that time, it comforted them to know that they could actually help people in that way. Next slide. And so as you can see, in March, people at the very height of it, they were really identifying as suffering. And we kept monitoring every week as the case managers would ask the well-being numbers. And so we saw improvements in the way people were being able to navigate their way through this pandemic. And absolutely, I absolutely agree. You have questions that you can use for both adults and youth. They're slightly different, but the Cantrell questions are the same. Next slide. And so I think the big part, and I know we're running out of time, and so hopefully I'm okay there, but I just wanted to really mention that there were opportunities to think about it from multiple levels, and that really it's an extraordinarily useful tool. And then the entire WIN measures are extraordinarily helpful, and maybe another time we could talk about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I didn't know we would have the opportunity to hear from you as well. So really delighted to hear your firsthand experiences. And I just encourage folks both in the chat or folks like we've done before, even though we're a large group, to come off speaker and see what other kind of observations, questions, curiosities come from any of what you've heard. And I think we started to answer this idea of the SHOMO survey being used for both adults. There's some overlap, I think, as Elizabeth pointed out. But I think Mike had just an observation. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add to your observation as a question.
Yeah, I guess I'm seeing some of these things coming together. And I just recently saw this NPR article, which I shared, and it all just kind of came together. But there's an element of hope, I guess, which I didn't put in, which is maybe by using measures and by getting better data and being closer to folks, through that, maybe we'll be able to encourage more well-being. And I was so struck with Elizabeth's showing of the teens and just how bifurcated, more split they were. But you know, in the challenge with knowledge comes opportunity, and so I guess I get hopeful about opportunity and where our conversation now will go.
We were really amazed at even looking at it by our LGBTQ youth, cutting that data and really identifying some youth, like we didn't realize that the bisexual youth were ones that had greater risk issues and things like that. So again, your data helps you look at and fine tune how you can be supportive in multiple ways, and some folks that you just may have been missing in plain sight.
Monty, this is Kim. May I add one thing I failed to mention, which is we have in Snohomish, you know, we identified the hospital, or not the hospital, our service area as a community, but many communities within the communities are using the survey. And for example, Everett Housing Authority, where do they need to focus with their clients? The Oso landslide region has used it in the Stille Valley to say, how do we come together as a community, and where are our pockets of suffering? And the results are always different in each community. So we're doing it in Alaska now, and New Mexico, and a few other places. But just that's one way trying to get at how do you identify specific needs for a specific community rather than trying to overlay all of Snohomish County's plans, or assuming that that's specific for every micro community. So
yeah.
Forgot to say that.
Thanks for that, Kim. I think I had heard from your colleague, Scott, that there was also some work that you all were starting to do there and partnering with NAACP around BIPOC youth. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah, and they'll be doing, if they haven't done the survey, they will be doing it with that community as well. We've done it with the larger NAACP. We've done it with LETI, which is our Latin Training Institute. And so we've churches, youth.
What else is popping up for folks? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kim, it really ties back to, our last couple of years and leaning into targeted universalism. I think your comments are just like, we can't take one set of data and assume that that says something about every community, and having those, distinct strategies within communities, that just really resonated.
Yeah. I wonder. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I think one of the things that's really useful about the well-being assessment is because it only takes 3.5 minutes for women who are at a low literacy level to take. It's very easy to do that in a very targeted way. So there isn't a lot of collection burden. It doesn't take a lot of extra support for people to do it because of the literacy level that it's at. So it really allows communities to take control over their own data and to be able to see and measure and understand it. That's where we had not expected community coalitions to do it every month or to do it but they did. They would do it at fairs. They would do it at different celebrations because they wanted that pulse check of their community, and it allowed them to have ownership of their data. And as they found out the things that mattered for them, they wouldn't ask all of the sub questions again. They would just ask the ones that were most relevant along with those 2 Cantor's ladder questions. So they could see who was thriving, struggling, and suffering, how they were doing. They could use it at a micro level for the person to be engaged in a conversation about what was going on for them. And they could watch over, they could monitor the key things that mattered for communities over time. It really put the data and the outcomes in the hands of communities.
Thanks, Shoma. I was just curious, we hadn't heard Ben's voice, but glad you're here, Ben. And I just was curious if you wanted to add anything to how this, in your mind, ties back to targeted universalism that's come up a couple times, this type of measurement.
The only thing I could say is I love to hear my voice, and so I will say my voice, but no, I think that the folks that have been expressing thus far, it has been perfect, and I couldn't add anything more to it.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I'll just add is speaking of empowerment, is it really empowers people who are actually trying to help those in the community. And sometimes they don't always know exactly what to do. So it really, I've just found that it really is something that both the person who's doing the survey, but then the person who's also implementing it with someone finds very valuable.
Hi, this is Linda. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm very excited about what I'm seeing. Too often the surveys that we have for our staff or even patients take a long time to get information back. So by the time you get it back, it's like most likely not as relevant as you'd want the real-time information. So my question is about process. Are these surveys available at a cost? Are they available through the North Sound? I just last night approved a goal with our board of directors to focus on some of our staff well-being because we work in healthcare, and COVID has been terrifying for a lot of people. And I really am worried about, our staff's well-being. And this seems very exciting, something that we can measure quickly and measure often and actually use the data real time to make changes. And so I'm really curious about okay, how do we get going on this? So this is a lovely, wonderful experience this morning. So thank you all.
Linda, that's a great question. We really developed, the WIN measures came out of a federal, non-federal process, and were really something that we've held to be part of the commons. So they are available to you at no cost, except we ask that you please consider sharing the learning back with others, because this is such a rich space to learn, and it's amazing. So there's a WIN measurement cooperative where those across the nation who are working on this and using these measures share that information back with one another about what they're learning and where possible, where the data is, etc.
That's a wonderful gift. Thank you for that gift. That's wonderful.
Kim, I know you're not ready to drop off. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your leadership. And I know that there's a little bit of an opportunity potentially with Providence and a conversation around how we might partner with Providence. I don't want to say too much because I think those are early stage around what might be some of that infrastructure for some common measures around well-being. And you all are uniquely suited to be a partner in that space.
Yeah, thanks, Kim, so much. And Linda, you know, not a surprise to have you ask that question. You know, I think what we've been exploring is how the ACH can just be a backbone for helping anyone who wants to use that tool. Like, are there ways we can support you in any way if that's something you want to use? But I think as you continue in this conversation today, you're going to hear that, you know, the board is thinking about this. We're talking about that being kind of one of our key factors as we look forward past the Medicaid transformation project. So a number of ways that we're thinking about it too.
Thanks, Liz. And I think Nicole's, we're coming up on time, had chatted in earlier on that there's some real intentionality around a number of stakeholders that are thinking about this well-being and how it might fit into some other measurement narrative kind of bridging strategies. I don't know if Nicole, if you want to add anything to Liz's comment there.
Yeah, we have had kind of starts and stops with our data initiative group because of the impacts of COVID, and it's been you know, starting with public health wanting to get involved, and then now they're dealing with testing and vaccination, and so but we really do feel committed to having a kind of a space for the well-being survey, because the more we share it, the more interest there is, and the usability of it, and really being able to respond quickly to where we're currently at, it's taking hold, and the interest has grown, and so we want to have a space for that, and so that's what we're planning to do. And I'm just going to put it in one more time, so because I promised Megan I would.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks for your leadership. I see there's a question that Mary Jo around sampling, and I think that there's probably a lot of other questions around how might I get started that maybe, Liz, we could just agree to figure out how we might follow up, including with our partners, Shoma and We in the World, which we're all part of the same network and have the same aspirations for a more equitable well-being. The simple answer to that is that groups, as Shoma's pointing out, have used it in a lot of different ways. We've used it in meetings, so just convenient samples as conversation starters, and you can get quite sophisticated around how intentional you want to do around that sampling. So you can use that however you like, but I think there'll be more conversations around how we can really meet the collective needs and maybe some individual needs. And on that note, Shoma and Elizabeth, thank you for your partnership and being here. Of course, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. I know you all are both busy, but you've given us a lot to think about, and I think more to come.
It was a privilege to be with you. We'll send you a gift bag of, you know, the youth well-being assessments and the sampling document, and a couple of versions that teams are using in the context of COVID that are just like 2 or 3 really fast ways to understand well-being and social needs in the context of contact tracing and other responses, if that's helpful.
Great.
That would be so great. Yeah, and I'll just add to Monty that, you know, one of the things that's been so awesome in this conversation is we've been building partnership across the North Sound region. And so, you know, Shoma, when you jump into our conversations, when folks from other states jump into that conversation, it just really is like broadening this network of people who can help kind of expand the thinking on it and share some experiences. So appreciate every connection and tendril that gets created here. So Elizabeth, nice to meet you. And thanks so much for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
So I think it's a good time to maybe take a bio break or whatever you'd like to do. If you want to do your own stretch break, dance, move around. Let's 10 minutes from where we are now. So we'll get started close to about 10:40, just slightly after that. I hope you all have enjoyed your break. We're going to get going in just a minute. Barbara, I see your smiling face. I missed the great exercise that your Nicola did for us. So sorry for no really great exercise break, but hopefully you enjoyed a little extra long time. And again, we're going to go in just a minute, and I'm going to kick it to Liz.
So Monty, are we
I say we're ready to roll. I wanted to give folks a full 10 minutes, and we're right at that.
I know. I'm kind of like, was it 10:41 or 10:42? I can't remember.
We think alike. Yeah, go for it.
All right. Thank you so much. So, one of the things that happens in prepping for these calls is, of course, you think, oh my God, we got 3 hours. How are we going to fill the time? And then all of a sudden you realize we're running out of time. But, one of the things that we wanted to do, and I'm going to turn this to Nicole to get us started. We want to somewhat connect the dots from the conversation that we had on Wednesday about how we think about like our self-care and community care. We're going to bring in some pieces of what the board is thinking about. But also just, the notion that COVID has had a pretty significant impact on your work and certainly on our work. And so, Nicole, I'm going to just ask you if you would just start maybe talking about some of the, like what we thought we'd be doing this year versus what we are doing this year, like how our team's been asked to step in and provide support, and maybe just touch on kind of how COVID played into some of the both current state and future state discussions that we've had.
Yeah. So I knew Liz was going to ask this because I needed to prep a little bit, because in some ways I think of that question of like, it seems like everything has changed. And then there's things that feel like they've stayed totally the same and have continued, or there's things that have just ramped up the pace of everything. So it's like this trifecta of normalcy, totally not normal, and then quickly, let's turn this around and do things we thought we were going to do in 2 years. And I, thinking back of the last time we had our convening in January, where many of us were at Tulalip, I felt like we were just starting to dip our toes into conversations around like well-being and vital conditions. And then like 2020 came, and March 2020 came, and it was like that older sibling that just shoves you into the pool with all your clothes on. And like, that's what the year has felt. And you just had to sink or swim. And I think, Liz, that was one of the first things you might have said when you hired me. So if I take a step back and think of like, where were we in early March? It was really interesting. For our team, it was going to be an exciting travel time. There are all these awesome conferences that a bunch of our staff are going to get to. And I remember looking at the news and being like, I don't know about this. I don't know about what's going on. And I started, having some individual conversations. And I think within a week, we had canceled staff flying. We had made a choice. I had recommended we stand up an incident command system, which is like early on, me being a total epidemiology nerd and experience in emergency preparedness, like things are going to get tough for us. And for those who know the benefits of an ICS, of like, order is really helpful in times of chaos. And so just for our team, we kind of stood up this ICS structure. And when I think about how, like, where did we think we were heading? I remember words that Liz said early on of that for some partners, and it was really evident quite like in January, I think there were even some public health folks that couldn't come to the convening. Like there were partners that were getting hit real early, the health systems, EMS and fire. COVID had already had an impact before it sort of trickled out to the rest of us. And so in March, we stood up this ICS structure to really think about like, okay, there's kind of three branches. So if you're into the ICS, you know that they totally use like a branch system. There's how do we prep our team and maintain our team? First priority. How do we support our team both professionally and in their home lives? Then there's this, how do we stay the course of our current work? Because Liz saying majority of our organizations, they don't have they have to maintain their work. We as an entire community need these organizations that we work with to maintain their work. So, from the full spectrum of dental, yes, we still have teeth. We have to maintain our teeth in a pandemic, to like substance abuse and support for treatment, and the full spectrum of what we can't, our partners and the work that they do in this region cannot fail. And so really having a sense of like, we need to hold on to that and think about it. And then there was this like unknown in March of like COVID. And at that time, it was simply distributing cloth masks. And so I kind of thought for a while, that's all we were going to be doing. So if I kind of break them out, I just want to have a moment of pause of acknowledging and expressing such gratitude to our incredible team and their resiliency. When every question, I'm pretty sure every time we've hired a new staff, we ask how you do with change. And I think as they have learned, their response, if we were to ask them now, like, I think we understand change better. And I think we're able to pivot really, really well. We have such a spectrum of expertise on our staff that allows us to pivot quickly. And I think that structure really did allow us to step into this year together. And we have maintained our staff. We have hired a new staff person. And so I just really kudos to the team. You guys are amazing. So in thinking of like what shifted or how did it impact the work we were currently doing, and going back to that mindset of Liz repeated, like people have to maintain the work that they're doing. We have to have the organizations in this region maintain the work they're doing. So I think what occurred early on and was really thinking of like, well, what are the immediate needs? We are an organization that has flexible funding, and how could we, that is not always, that is a luxury. And we've always acknowledged that. So immediately opening up and listening and providing, hopefully it was a relatively painless application for telehealth funds. So immediately, what do you need? What materials do you need? Do you need laptops? 3 laptops was all some folks needed. And so just quickly pivoting that, we did hear early on the challenges smaller community-based organizations were having with PPE, and that really being a struggle. You can't, if you're an adult family home, you don't need 5 pallets of KN95 masks, you need a box. And so really listening to some of those and seeing if we could play a role, which we have. I think if I estimates correctly, we have pushed out about $10 million worth of PPE to our region, from cloth masks to gowns and face shields. And so, really listening early on that was a need to maintain their door so their doors could stay open. We just gave masks a few days ago to the YMCA, and kid masks finally came in, and we were able to give them a bunch of masks, and they're able to maintain their services. So, there was the stay the course. And so I think a lot of the work that had been planned with, maintaining some of the opioid prevention work, some of the oral health LIN work, some of the care coordination work, that work continued. It just started to look different. And one of the things, and I think a lot of you have been learning this too, is when you are a regional organization, it's not always easy to get together at one time, find a space that works for everybody for in person. So the benefit, I think, for having some of these region-wide conversations of trying to stay the course was that virtual actually was a benefit. You actually have some more participation. And so that, I don't know if there's a silver lining in any of this, but that pivot really did allow for more voices to enter. Liz, I was trying to remember some of the things from the partner retreat of, what did we say we were committed to? And it, was continuing to move some of the work that was already in motion. And then I'll just remember Eliza and her saying, I want to see a youth convening in the next year. And so that Eliza's leadership and the other Indigenous youth that have come forward and our staff who have been supporting has, I think, been an incredible opening. It's not really COVID related. It's really more of a new area of work that we're kind of growing into. So that's kind of like where we were headed. Now, Liz and I also had a heavy lift of that's terrible because Kim, you're on the phone and she's already left, but our board president, not a heavy lift, but really looking for a future state presentation to the board. We were, there's a lot of conversations around sustainability. How are you going to move this work forward? And because of partner reporting, because of different advisory groups that we've had along the way, we already had I would say an umbrella or a shell of the work that we thought we were heading into in the next few years. I think what has been incredible in this time of COVID is that we started filling in and seeing ourselves pilot some of these ideas that we didn't think we were going to be doing we certainly didn't think we were going to be doing them last year, and we really didn't think it wasn't going to be starting until 2022. And, areas of elevating emerging issues, playing a regional convener around really important topics, leaning into racial injustice and social injustice issues. And I think what has happened is COVID has bubbled up some of these issues collectively in the public and then within our communities that we are working with. And we started to see these sort of pillars of what we thought we would be working on. We are working in them now. And I can give you a couple of examples, I think, before I get to ask Liz a question, which is in COVID, we chose early on that we would be stewards to public health. And so because it's a public health emergency, not duplicating, not muddying the waters, we would pretty much say yes to anything that public health needed. And one of the presentations that we had provided to the board is trying to think of how could we be a nonprofit arm to public health? How could we be an advocate for public health? And that is what we're doing right now. And so, that we're kind of into that. We've been asked to step in and host long-term care facility calls to address so that there's a regional sharing and network and community of how you respond to outbreaks and elevating issues around, now we're onto vaccine. And so I think that's one area that, looking into how do we be a backbone essentially for an agency. I think of other kind of COVID testing and vaccine, which is sort of a combination of being a catalyst for change and then also elevating issues as they arise and really trying to problem solve this as a community. We're being asked in different settings to kind of help bring partners to the table of the vaccine rollout. And, we're in the mix of it right now. I think there's much more work to be done, but, working with some health systems and public health, human services, just showing what it takes to kind of address community challenges in a collective response. I think about perhaps one of the biggest takeaways with where COVID has pivoted this work is it has allowed us to show this is targeted universalism. You want to make a difference. This is the approach you need to take. And so where sometimes it's been on paper, it's felt theoretical to some folks, when we explain, and just wrote this up to some folks around vaccine planning, is, you know, everybody who wants it should be able to get a COVID vaccine. Are there certainly different approaches you need to take for different communities and different individuals? Absolutely. That's targeted universalism. And so really being able to step into that, and I'm hearing it much more in conversations. So, you know, it's been a long year, I think, for all of y'all. But if, you know, Liz, if I could kind of sum up like how it impacted and how we shifted, I think, to me, 2020 became an unexpected pilot year for us. And if I were to think of like, where are we continuing to lean into, I think of the capacity building section of partner change plans, and we're beginning to lean into that more. And I think when we started asking more frequently, how can we help? We said yes before we knew how we were going to respond to it. I think that opened the door to really shape where we thought we were going to go. And then we were able to pilot test a couple of these different areas. So I get to ask you a question now, Liz. With all of the things that, like, so after the year that we have had, it's kind of like, now what? So we've been piloting. The question kind of back to you is, where are we going? How does this year start to impact and influence the organization? How does it change perhaps some of our contracting, our funding? What has last year done for the ACH?
Big question. and I probably should like let everybody know that when we set up our incident command structure, that Nicole was our commander. So there's been a lot of like back and forth of me listening to Nicole for the past 12 months. And so Nicole, you were reminiscing about things I've said to you. So here's something that you said to me the first week of March last year. You said, I don't see us being back in the office before 2021. And so while we were all struggling with, like, we're packing up our laptops and people wanted to know, are we like out of the office for 2 months or 3 months? Like how long, like you knew what this was going to look like for us over the long term. And it has just really helped me. So when I think about our team and the leadership, you know, Nicole, you're just like such a key part of that. So thank you. There are some pieces that are jumping off points for me. So if you guys will humor me for like 1 second before I answer Nicole's question. You know, we have suffered, you know, and I think back to that thriving, struggling, suffering, like we have suffered personal losses, organizational losses. This has been like a tough year. And I think we all know people who have lost somebody close to them because of COVID. And I think back to this moment, I'm going to say it's around the age of, you know, 14 or 15, at least for my sons, where they have this aha moment that you can feel two conflicting emotions at the same time. You know, because like you go through and you just think, I'm either happy or sad, I'm either excited or I'm depressed. And there is this moment when they go, holy crap, you mean I could be like happy and really distraught at the same time? And I think of that a lot during this last year, that I have been angry, I have been depressed, I have felt loss and sadness, and I have been amazed at what people have done in spite of all those things, or in addition to all those things happening. So the last year has just been like kind of a kaleidoscope emotionally, and I would assume for many of you, if not all of you. And then I think of John Kitzhaber. Any of you know John Kitzhaber is just like a friend and an inspiration to me. And 20 years ago, he said, you know, part of the thing that we always have to be looking for, the contradictions and inconsistencies in our policy. If we're ever going to try to achieve something, like we just have stuff that sends us like careening into each other because we don't know very well how to deal with this patchwork of policy and laws that have been created. So, you know, I think, Nicole, for one of the things that you said, who could have imagined a year ago when we were trying to tell public health that we had their back, that the governor would like introduce in the middle of COVID a concept about regionalizing public health. Like we just could not have predicted that in the middle of all of this work. And so we're, you know, just as partners, a little bit better poised, I think, in the North Sound to be at least a partner to some of those conversations, not trying to fix it, but to be a good support and a good partner. For those of you, you know, and I think of, you know, Linda McCarthy speaking earlier, who was part of the ACH before I was part of the ACH, like we're in the 5th year of a 5-year Medicaid waiver. And so 2021 marks the end of our current contract with the Healthcare Authority. It actually marks the end of our contracts with all of our partner organizations because those contracts are all shaped around this Medicaid transformation project. And so the last 2 years, the work that we've been doing with the board is how do we identify ourselves as being more than the contract to be the ACH for the Medicaid transformation project. And we've come a long way with trying to identify like our role in the region. I think to some of those early days where there were a couple of counties and maybe the BHO and maybe some of the public health folks who thought the ACH was like an unnecessary add-on. We were competing with them. We were going to take over their jobs. And because of partnership and relationship, those things have changed. And, you know, there's just an easier way for us to see how we can support the work that you all are doing. The board in December voted to, for the first time, you know, and you've all probably been part of like, you know, what I think of painful discussions about vision and mission statements. And so the board decided to replace our mission, which for probably 6 or 7 years had been improving the health of people in the North Sound region. And they changed it. They actually adopted a purpose statement. And they said the purpose for the ACH to create a just and inclusive culture and the necessary conditions for all community members to thrive. We have spent a year and a half with the board, starting with John Powell, Shoma, you know, and Monty and the team last year, trying to incorporate these notions of well-being, belonging, bridging. How do we do that work when, you know, you have the immediacy of the things you're doing today kind of in the middle of that? And so the board adopted that in December, and it was a reflection of 18 months worth of work, but it was also preparing us for what happened when we say we're finished with the Medicaid transformation project. And do we close our doors? Do we keep going? Like, is there some value add? And for those of you who might remember the first time we came together down at Everett Community College, August, like, you know, probably like 2 or 3 years ago. And you said, like, how will we know that the ACH has succeeded? And I said, it'll be because you all tell us that there's been some value added to the region by purpose of, you know, by reason for what we've been a part of. So certainly you guys have done all of the work, and we're hoping that that continues. So we have a couple of things that we see happening in this coming year. All your contracts end, as I said, at the end of this year, and we have to figure out what does the scope of work look like starting January 1st, 2022. You all know what your contracts look like, what the scopes of work were for you know, the 8 project areas we took on. And now we're saying we're talking about equitable well-being. So how do we build expectations, put that into contract language? You know, we've talked about things like, are we, you know, working with you to co-create like a compact or some kind of an set of agreements for partners in the region? All of those things we're going to be doing in 2021. And, you know, as Nicole mentioned, we had a couple of partners who were not able to make it either Wednesday or today. And they asked us to please reschedule these conversations to later in the year. And we just said, like, we can't. And as much as I appreciate like the things that pull us in different directions, we actually feel like we're on a journey heading into 2022. As crazy as that sounds to be talking about that in the first week in February, but like we have things that we have to do, not for you or to you, but with you, in order for us to know what happens the day after your contracts end. So introducing these concepts, you know, that you've heard over the last 2 days, 3 days, you know, were important for us because they're going to be tied into how we think about expectations. You know, you heard about the well-being measures, like we're talking about, and I think the board has built some expectations for us that we're going to be measuring well-being across the North Sound region. And so how we do that, how we do it at a broad scale, as Kim described in Snohomish County, and how do we know what's happening in any specific communities and, you know, localized things that are occurring. Like we need to just think through some of that. You know, we presented this future state discussion. The state refers to it as a sustainability plan. And we just argued against using the word sustainability. And so we said, you know, what we're doing is we're shifting from this state to the next state. So we think of it as a future state plan. We presented it to the board in June. And the way that they showed us that they accepted that plan was by voting on the changes that they made to the board, the organization's purpose, and the goals looking forward. So we have the board approval for a specific set of strategies. We've got a slide deck, we have a recording, you know, I think we've made some of those things available to you all in August, but anything that would help you understand like where we're going next, I think just ask us and we can share that with you. And I think the question for us, or the question for you, is really, can you start thinking with us? Like, what can we ask of you in relation to advancing that purpose for the region? You know, like we're of course hoping that you all agree that you want to have a contract with us in 2022. But it's like, what can we expect of you? What can you ask of us? What can we expect of you to try and put those agreements together? You know, back in 2016, the Healthcare Authority asked each of the ACHs to put in writing what our sustainability plan was starting January of 2022. And my colleagues across the state wrote things like, we're going to get the health plans to pay for everything in these 8 project areas. And it may come as no surprise to you all, but North Sound did not write that. We actually wrote like 2 or 3 sentences. And we said our sustainability plan is based on being able to have partners build relationships with partners. And so that's part of why we have put the kind of energy into these gatherings that we have, because we figured if there wasn't another dollar, the things you all are doing together still get to build upon each other and grow the work. So we've got this question. The board met yesterday. They also did a 2-day learning session, and the second part was yesterday. And they went through an exercise about kind of creating some regional investment strategies and how it might look to have a portfolio development. And so they may continuously over the year have some questions that we feed out to you. But it's really like, we need to know that anything the ACH is doing, we're doing because it's what you feel is most important to be moved forward, and not me and Nicole, because Nicole and I can sit and share like the things we thought about at 3 a.m. and maybe make it happen, but it doesn't happen without you. And so, you know, just we're feeling really grateful, and we feel like there is this massive hill in front of us of work. We are tying it to equitable well-being. We want to be able to measure that over time and have that be one of the indicators of impact of our work. And, you know, so it's been really an adventure over the last 4 years. And I'm going to end there and hope that as Monty now tees up the questions for you all, and you go into breakout, that you're going to come back and you're going to give us awesome ideas that help us continue to move forward this notion of how do we keep moving forward to 2022 and beyond. So thank you. Nicole, did I answer your question though?
Yes, that's great.
Well, all I can say, you know, Liz and Nicole, and I, looking at other people's expression here, I just, you know, want to acknowledge the fact that you all are, you know, great stewards, and you're reflecting the shared stewardship that's part of this partnership, and it's extraordinary. And I think it's an exciting invitation for 2021 and beyond. And so this isn't the end of a conversation, despite Liz's pressure to come back with really great ideas. But these are the two questions that we invite you to kind of consider. And you're going to be in smaller groups, probably around 4 folks in each of your breakouts. And, you know, Holly and Cedric and others that help create. I'm looking at Holly for some reason on my screen right now. This, you know, let's be thinking about this as peers. So this is one of those places. What steps are you taking now, or could you take to support equitable recovery, in Liz's air quotes? You know, what are the opportunities? What are you already doing now? What's right in front of us where we could really be stepping up as stewards and deepening our work on that front? And I think there's a close cousin to that, just thinking even more broadly. And this comes again from some of the board conversation yesterday and even our conversation Wednesday. What could we do to expand and deepen belonging in our communities where you touch? And that could be your organization, but particularly thinking about collectively. You know, what do we do to really expand this sense of belonging and co-creation in our work, and to model that? So those are the 2 broad questions. You only have about 15, maybe 17 minutes. So it's going to be high level. It's a conversation starter. Feel free to be prepared to kind of chat some of the ideas back, but this is your conversation. We're going to just kind of hear what starts to bubble up for you. So I think Tiffany, I can't remember who's going to miraculously put us into small groups.
Hi, Monica. I'm going to see if I can get you into a, never mind. She's gone.
us, and I see that Holly and a couple of others, and Megan, thanks for negotiating the technology space with us. So, in our last just bit of time here together, I don't want to be too systematic. I think you guys probably went wherever you felt like you needed to with those conversations, and would love to just kind of take a 5-10 minutes to kind of hear what was mostly bubbling up for you, and would love to hear that primarily through some voice, but would encourage some chatting too. So the space is open to your wisdom.
Yeah, and Monty, I just want to encourage what you encouraged. I can't remember if it was earlier today or if it was on Wednesday. That, like, even if the group only mentions one or two things, if others in the group can put things, that would be awesome.
And you just went out a little bit for me, where I encourage folks to also put some in the chat.
Put things in the chat.
Got it. Great. Yes. Please, please, please. Yeah, let's maximize the last amount of energy we have.
Hey, Monty, this is Yuki. I'll kick us off.
Thanks, Yuki.
So when we were talking about the well-being survey, it dawned on me that, a lot of organizations, Ideal Option included, we collect a lot of data. And it's how we want to use that data to inform how we might want to do some targeted, universalism, like address that concept and develop strategies either with ourselves or with the other partners to help with access to services, access to other services. And in my mind, I was thinking, maybe there's an opportunity to go to the people as opposed to waiting for the people to come to us, but using that data that we currently have and moving forward that way.
Yuki, thanks as always for kicking us off. And that's a idea with lots of possibilities that picks up some of those themes around targeted universalism. And I love that, bringing that data and that meaning making to people and individuals and groups that are closest to the solutions is a little bit of what I'm hearing in that. Please.
So I in a group, I tend to talk too much, but one of the things that was pointed out, and Holly pointed it out, that there is a huge need for a paradigm shift within organizations to actively engage so that we could have smaller victories and targeted communities. And by that, I mean, is that at least I'm hoping I'm not putting, changing the meaning, the true meaning of what Holly was saying. And Holly, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it is that large organizations have the tendency of, this is what we're willing to do, and you must be almost to the 11th hour before we will help you. You must be in dire straits before we will help you. Whereas, what we're seeing and heard earlier in the surveys and studies that were being done, that well-being is greater, or thriving becomes greater when help comes earlier, and they're made and given a sense of belonging earlier in the process, not later in the process. And I think that that's very key and important as we move into supporting an equitable recovery. We need to go to the targeted communities as opposed to saying, we've got 1,000 people to cover. Let's make sure that we cover 80% of it, because or as Kim pointed out, 70% of it, and the other 30% we'll just handle as we can. That's backwards to me. That's totally backwards to me. We should be targeting that 30%, because the 70%, they need the least amount of help. The 30% need the most amount of help.
Ben, thank you. I love when you bring your voice into the room and encourage more and more. And I think people would welcome that. I see a lot of head shaking as you're speaking. It's the conversation that we're stuck in nationally, but that's not working so well around early, and how we really target this in a situated way with who needs the most help, particularly with urgent needs. And there's control and power in this group to actually do this on a regional level without worrying about that national. I mean, certainly we worry about the national, but to practice this in some new ways. This is great. What else? Please, we can continue to speak into targeted universalism. What other ways are you thinking about expanding belonging? I'm kind of trying to track this. Maybe Stacey, you can help me too on the side there.
A couple of themes coming up from one area was broadband access.
I'm wondering if somebody wanted to kind of speak into that issue that came up a little bit on Wednesday, came up in the board meeting.
This is Anne from Whatcom County, and I work for government. I'm Human Services Manager for the county. And I think one of the positive things that came from COVID, and there's not very many, but one was the fact that we had the ability to expand broadband access into the rural areas of our county and for people who typically could not afford the equipment or the internet access. And for us, that's increased our ability to connect with people that we typically did not, and also for them to feel more empowered to contribute to the discussions and the solutions. That we have found that people who might be more shy speaking in groups that are in person are much more comfortable speaking in those meetings, whether it's through chat or otherwise. And for us, it's just been a tremendous blessing to have broader and more diverse conversations. I think the other thing we talked about too, especially from the clinical realm, is that there are two populations in particular that we're concerned about. One is youth without the socialization and the supports they get from school. We've seen, of course, an increase in depression and anxiety, and it's pretty scary. And also same for the elder adults who are perhaps isolated in their homes, and that we really know that that isolation has impacted both of them. So the belonging is not only belonging to their communities, but belonging to the human race as well. It's been a pretty sad thing to see that isolation impact people so negatively.
That's great. Thank you so much for bringing that into the broader conversation, and loving the conversation going on the side. So what else is coming up that would be worth really exploring in this large group setting?
So in our group, we talked about how encouraged we were with the data being collected about how people are doing in the community and within organizations. And one thing that I've been thinking about is alongside gathering the data, then what do we do with it? Which I think was, why these questions were being asked. And one thing our group talked about was the importance of going into the communities to ask them what they need. So we have this data on how people are feeling. And now it's, what do you need from us? Well, what is it that's going to be helpful? And taking the role of learner rather than teacher as organizations, which I think often we miss the mark on that. We think we know what's best and that we need to teach people what they need. And I think that is also another paradigm shift that might need to happen as well.
Thank you, Holly, for connecting a couple dots there around the paradigm shift and kind of what posture we take as and collectively as stewards. I think you're right that so often, we assume those answers. We expect folks to come to our tables, and what are those stories and patterns underneath the data that only, people in the community can tell us.
Monty, this is Jackie. I wanted to share as we're talking about data. Some of it, I don't know, that didn't necessarily come up in our conversation, but it just kind of probed me as I was in a breakout room. But one of the powerful things that I experienced, I guess it was the last couple of weeks, is Verdant had reached out and we had a conversation. And in that conversation, they shared with us some of the ways in which they were looking at the data that they collect, and being mindful of, is this a need to know or is this a want to know? So being mindful of the most vulnerable populations, we're asking for them to relive trauma, right? So it's that process in a sense is traumatizing. And I think that like that in itself is critical. And I think it's imperative as we move forward of, okay, what does this look like? What could this really be? So I'm glad we're having this conversation about data, because one, we need to think about like, what does equitable recovery look like with data collection, right? And how are we being honest and transparent with those that we're essentially asking to extract their experience? So I just wanted to share that. Another thing that I shared in the group was that in this work moving forward, as we build out this plan, being mindful that, you know, some of us have a unique ability to hold space and meet folks where they are, but that in itself is work. It's taxing emotionally. And so there needs to be some additional supports. And I said that because after I was in, board meeting most of the day yesterday, and I felt like I was at an all-time low. And it was like, why is my energy so low? And it was having to hold that space for folks that's learning and growing and understanding that when we have learning opportunities, that comes at the expense of somebody else. And so while we're all here to collectively support each other in this journey moving forward, wherever you are, and I have been saying this throughout the week because I think oftentimes, well, one, right, we have like this fragility of, oh no, and this guilt and shame wants to come in. There's no, growing doesn't happen when we carry guilt and shame, right? I think allowing ourselves to hold information and not be riddled with the guilt and shame. It's a system that we all inherited. And so long as, our intentions are pure as we come to these conversations, like this is the real work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Your comment, the very first meeting, stuck in my mind, like a lot of things, anchoring ourselves in tough truths. That's what you said on the panel. And I always appreciate how you bring voice to some of those tough truths back to even the data side. There's an opportunity to engage in meaning making and data that actually could increase belonging and a sense of co-creation, or it could re-traumatize folks. And Shoma and our teams have talked a lot about this, to be really sensitive around what that data collection looks like, because we can also just engage people in relationships in that kind of posture of learning. There's a lot of different ways that we could be nuanced at the same time, really collectively orienting ourselves around these pieces. But thank you. What else? We have a few more minutes.
Hey, just as a computer technician, I know that we already touched on broadband, but in our group, we talked a little bit about accessibility of broadband in rural areas as well. And this is something that comes up for me in my work a lot. The more rural we get, I'm sure I'm not telling anybody anything when I say this, the more affordable housing is, the more rural it tends to be. And the more rural that housing tends to be, the less good access to internet is. And in this day and age is absolutely critical. We can't get jobs, we can't get assistance, we can't communicate with our doctors. Post-COVID, we can't do telehealth meetings, we can't do normal meetings. Everything is reliant on broadband access, and rural communities not having access to that is a massive inequitability.
Thank you for that. I've been mesmerized by your background and your fire going all day.
Well, otherwise you can see that I haven't made my bed in my TV screen. So,
well, we were in that group together with Mary Jo, and one of the pieces that I see with families, particularly with a family member who is disabled, if as a caregiver of an adult child with a disability, myself and many other people were classified as 1A. in terms of getting the vaccine. But for many of the families that I work with, you have to do all of that online. You have to be able to submit information and work through a system that can be traumatizing. And so I've assisted some families in some ways, but it's access becomes, you know, the intersection of all those pieces of poverty and geography and language and communication and racism and ableism and all of those things become such a huge barrier that, you know, sometimes when I'm talking with families, we just come up with the strategy of what is one thing you can do today. And that's enough. That's enough. But it's, we keep having it, you know, in our faces and in our lives and in our profession every day. So part of that too is having this relationship that we can talk to one another that keeps us at this. And I think about that's, you know, I love what somebody said earlier of relationships, that is what will sustain us and does. But I need a relationship with broadband for everybody.
Thanks, Beverly. Take a couple more, and Stacy, maybe just as a cue to you, if there's some things that you're seeing that you want to lift up as well in the chat.
So being a ACA partner has enabled us to build some coalitions with healthcare, with education, in particular, with our health department. That's really been our focus with, you know, part of our focus of what to do. So those coalitions are now strong. And we're talking about looking ahead and what the ACA can do. Of course, funding's always a part of it. It's the funding that allows me to spend as much time as I do on that kind of work. But as I said in the chat, we've just been chipping away. And I'm tired of chipping. So I want to go big on the decision makers, on the policy makers. The time to do that is limited, but you know, we have to use that power. And as a white cis woman, I've got that kind of power that some of my fellow citizens in our county do not. And I want to change that. We want to change that. And we want those coalitions to change that. So that's sort of my big dream about what comes next.
Thanks, Mary Jo. Just been following your thoughts on that, on the strand there. And it takes me back to the conversation with Holly and you know, team and Evan and Jackie and Liz yesterday around this. Actually is a really interesting historic moment to go big, to actually look for some things that are really transformational. During my break, I got something popped up that talked about crowdsourcing hate in our country right now, as you can imagine. And that is happening. There is resistance to a lot of the values that this group stands for, but it has power to overcome those pieces as in this network. It's quite extraordinary. So Liz and maybe Stacey, if there's anything else you want to lift up, I'm going to come back to Liz for maybe some final comments. And again, feel free to keep chatting. We're capturing these.
Monty, one of the threads, and really it's building off of what Mary Jo was offering, I'm seeing sort of embedded in a variety of the shares, right, is just an appreciation for the journey that this group has been on. You know, feel that there's been growth sort of in and learning, and sort of that next big question implied in Mary Jo and one of the other team members here is, what are those next steps? You know, sort of when you know better, let's do better. But where are those couple of places? And I might at least toss up or bridge to that, you know, the basic needs and housing, again, among the vital conditions, have continued to be lifted up.
Yeah. Yeah, Liz, I was thinking of the slide, Shoma works closely with us. And one of the quotes we had yesterday is that the role of stewards, and it relates just directly to the purpose that you all have landed on, is really to expand those vital conditions for all people and places to thrive. And that is the work of stewardship. And it's the work of really understanding how different groups are situated and clear those barriers that have presented us to all forms of structural racism and othering that has happened forever in our country and our communities. And so you all, I feel like, are really uniquely positioned in our country right now to model a new way that's frankly countercultural to how we behave. And that's one of the reasons why folks like Shoma and a lot of us are just so grateful to be in the same space with you. And on that note, I'll pass it to you, Liz.
Great, Monty, and please again do this if my sound goes out. I'm still like sitting with Shoma's quote of just like what that means for us as we look forward. So I'm going to be sitting on that probably for a few days. I'm just going to talk a little bit about like what comes next. Because we have a couple of things that are kind of set, and whoa, and look, there's a screen. All right. So, we have what's on the screen is our next tribal learning webinar. Those happen every other month. And so the next one is exploring the contemporary meaning of Two-Spirit. And Tempest Dawson on our team, has been doing an amazing job of finding speakers who are willing to join those webinar series and share learnings with us. So hopefully we may see some of you again. But partly I'm thinking about again, 12 months ago plus a week when we were all together at Tulalip, and Eliza somehow got the microphone and said, we should do something focused on youth. And, in October, we had what I think of as the inaugural Indigenous Youth-Led Conference. And that group is still meeting and growing and talking about what that conference might be expanded to this fall. Holly mentioned, the POC gatherings that we've been doing. And if any of you have people of color on your teams or in your networks, would hope that you will share POC gatherings at northsoundech.org. They can reach out. Holly's actually kind of the curator, the steward of that email address, and can respond and help people get connected to those discussions. One of the things that I did want to mention about the well-being, and I chatted a little bit with Monty and team yesterday about this. One of the reactions I had to the well-being survey was just this amazing sense of privilege and how guilty I felt being in a position of privilege when my son, my brothers and sisters, their kids are suffering. And I just couldn't find a way in the responses to talk about the overwhelming sense of suffering that I am connected to, because the questions were asking about me, and I couldn't pull those in. So just thinking about that again as we think about individual versus community and collective thinking. And so we are envisioning some work around the well-being survey, using things that have been well tested and trying to see just how that works in our region and in communities. We do have, as you can imagine, a lot of stuff that are on the calendar. We actually, I'm thinking of Hillary and Elizabeth, how much pressure I put on them to have a calendar at a glance for 2021. So we actually have a calendar at a glance that shows the meetings that we're looking at throughout this year, all the possible times when you'll get an invitation to something. I think as soon as they feel like it's printable in some way, they're going to be sharing that out. But we do know that, as we have done the last 3 years. We're looking at 2 possible weeks in August, either the 4th and 5th or the 11th, 12th, to do our partner retreat. That's probably when, again, we'll be bringing to you kind of these ideas about how we think about 2022 and beyond, and giving all of your organizations some ample time, both before August and after August, to think about where your organizations fit in the construct. And then, lastly, the board is talking about some community listening sessions, and whether those are things that the ACH convenes or we partner with you and we ask you to convene. We've actually got those somewhat set in specific months throughout the year, because those are going to be also really important to our team and to the board in trying to understand, like, what do we need to do in terms of youth? What do we need to do in terms of seniors? And that some of this, we just need more information from community that will help us in prioritizing and trying to figure out how we can resource some of those efforts. So those are like where I'm circling as we end this. It is noon. I'm just going to say thank you. I know that there were probably 4 other things you could have done with this time, and we're just so incredibly honored and grateful that you chose to join us for this. So thank you. Thank you, Monty, and your team, and more to come. We shall see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Take care,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.